I now have with me Dr. Nigel Fletcher, political analyst and commentator from London. Thanks for your time, Dr. Fletcher. I'm going to start off with how we just ended that report. Sure, this is just one poll, but what is this reflective of? The intention of the nation, perhaps? Now, as someone who understands the economic and the cultural needs, the motivations, the minutiae of the UK populace at large, what is that intention really that this poll is indicative of?
Well, as you say, I think it is important to remember it is just one poll, and it's not necessarily borne out by some of the others that we've seen in recent weeks. But what is certainly the case is that we have a very fractured party system in terms of vote share. We could see that at the last general election, in fact, when Labour won the election with this overwhelming majority, which on the face of it seemed to suggest a huge amount of support for them. But they did so on the basis of only 34% of the vote, which historically is a very low vote share for a party winning an overall majority in the House of Commons, let alone a huge majority that they won. So we're already starting from a basis on which the Labour Party, as the government of the country, is on a fairly low vote share. The Conservatives, of course, on an even lower vote share, about sort of 10 points behind. They going up a couple of points is quite significant in terms of Labour falling and them overtaking them. But we're really not seeing a huge change to the overall structure of the party system. Reform were very strong at the election. They're posing a challenge to the Conservatives. And that's a pattern that we're seeing playing out here, where effectively we have Reform UK contending to be a main party of opposition in the first instance to the Labour Party. And we have seen that before in British politics. We have seen third parties trying to succeed and to overtake other parties. In the 1980s, we saw that with the SDP Liberal Alliance challenging the Labour Party for second place. But the British party system makes it very difficult for those parties to break through. So I think even though this is quite a worrying poll for Labour, but also for the Conservatives, we shouldn't necessarily get too carried away at this point.
Right. I'm going to come back to the system in a bit, but before that, since you did speak of Labour, Sir Keir Starmer gives a major speech on Thursday, outlines the 6 milestones for his government. These milestones are built upon 3 foundations: economic stability, secure borders, and national security. How solid does the mandate sound? Does it look set to deliver lasting change, or is Labour again falling prey to the incumbency curse that we are seeing around the world?
Well, you're absolutely right that incumbent governments have found it extremely difficult. That's part of the reason, I think, why the Conservatives were punished so badly at the last election. And we saw it, of course, in the United States recently at their election. Governments across the world have found it difficult if they are the incumbents. Labour benefited from that, of course, in July at the general election, but their inheritance was a very bad one. The global economic situation is not great. In Britain, growth has not been particularly strong. There's not a lot of money about. And so for a government coming in, as Labour did, with a huge majority, with lots of talk of change, they then face a very difficult economic situation. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, that they've got. If you're coming in as a government promising change, but you're dealing with the same economic problems that your predecessors have, it's very difficult. But having said all of that, it has been surprising that this government has had quite such a difficult start. If you compare it to the 1997 general election, with Tony Blair coming in with a lot of goodwill, his honeymoon, in political terms, lasted for almost the entirety of that parliament. He was very rarely, if ever, behind in the opinion polls. And yet now, just 4 months on, we've seen Labour's ratings going down. We've seen them dipping below, as you've said, below the Conservatives and Reform, in fact, in this poll. And Keir Starmer's personal ratings falling as well. So they are in a difficult position, and it's quite unusual for a government only 4 or 5 months into office to have this scale of relaunch.
Okay, Dr. Fletcher, I'm just going to zoom out a bit and ask you this. From what we've seen of the political situation in the UK, what should be our international media's bird's eye view of the politics in the UK?
Well, I think that a lot of these challenges that I've talked about for the government are worth watching, because one of the things that Reform UK have benefited from has been being an insurgent party, being a populist party that can capitalise on the difficulties facing incumbent government. They did so successfully, I think, against the Conservatives. But as you mentioned in your introduction, they are second to Labour in a large number of seats. And so if Labour are facing this degree of problems this early on in their government, with Keir Starmer's ratings falling, the economy in a difficult position, and so on, Reform UK are well placed to scoop up a lot of disaffected voters from the Labour side as well as from the Conservative side. And so it's almost a perfect storm for them. Right. They've managed to capitalise on people's disaffection with the Conservatives. They may now be looking to capitalise on the disaffection with Labour as well. So I think across the world, we've seen it in America with Donald Trump. We're now perhaps seeing it in the UK with Reform UK. Those who are able to be anti-establishment populists are able to benefit from the difficulties that incumbent governments have.
Dr. Fletcher, I'm sort of plagued with the paucity of time, but I would like to slip this quick one in before I let you go. Would it be correct to align this recent poll to a populist trend that you just spoke of, one witnesses in various other countries as well?
I think that this is something we are seeing across the world. It is a trend. If we look across Europe, we're seeing that in France, particularly, having their own political problems at the moment. The rise of populist movements some time ago, in the last decade after the economic crash, we saw it with parties of the left. We're also seeing it now with parties of the right as populist movements. It's something which I think in democratic politics across the world is an increasing problem if people are seeing governments not being able to deal with the problems that they're seeing, that you do open up these opportunities for opposition from populist movements. And it's quite difficult, I think, for parties in office with the responsibilities that face them in office to deal with the kind of promises you're able to make when you don't have those responsibilities.
Right. Dr. Fletcher, thank you so much for those insights and joining us on the program today.
Pleasure.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.